Jean is a member and founding and a former ruling elder at Bethesda Presbyterian and serves on the Commission on Ministry in the National Capital Presbytery. So she's Presbyterian like us. She is a teaching assistant at Wesley Theological Seminary after obtaining a Master of Theological Studies with a concentration in Biblical Studies from Wesley, which is exactly what I'm working on, sort of the one class at a time plan. Welcome, Jean. We're so glad you're here. And we're going to be learning from Jean about Jesus' crucifixion, passion, Palm Sunday stuff. And I'll pray us in, and Jean can take over. Gracious God, help us to have eyes to see and ears to hear, the discernment to go deep into your story, and the heart to hold the mystery with tenderness. Amen.
Okay, well, thank you, Rachel, for that very kind introduction. And I'd also like to thank Allison and Kathy and your entire church for inviting me. I'm honored and grateful to be here with you today. I'm going to be telling the story of Jesus's crucifixion and death as it's recounted in the Gospel of Mark, and then we'll discuss. But first, I'm going to tell you what my first couple of questions will be so that you can have them in mind while you're listening. So first, and in a way, we've kind of touched on this already in the pre-chat, and that is, how does hearing and watching the story told, storyteller style, how is that different? Are there things, like, let's face it, you've heard this story before. I don't think I need to give a spoiler alert if I mention, like, Jesus dies. So you've heard this story before, and more likely you're carrying around in your mind an amalgamated form of the crucifixion and death stories from all four Gospels. But you've heard this before. When you listen to me tell it today, are there things that sounded different, things you noticed, things you felt that you didn't just from previous experiences of hearing it read? So that's one thing. The other is more content-based, and that is, I hope you will listen in the story for things that what some people call speed bumps, basically something that slows you down, something that makes you say, what? What's that all about? Why did that person do that? Why is that detail in there? So these are things for you to think about. And I will tell the story. This is our invitation to remember. They forced a man passing by, coming in from the countryside, to carry the cross. It was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, and they took Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means skull place. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he didn't take it. And they crucified him. And they divided his clothes among them, casting lots to decide who was going to take what. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him, they crucified 2 bandits, one on his right and one on his left. People passing by insulted him, shaking their heads and saying, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself, come down from the cross. In the same way, the chief priests and the scribes were also mocking him among themselves, saying, he saved others, he can't save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now so that we may see and believe. Those who were being crucified with him also taunted him. At noon, darkness came over the entire land until 3 p.m. At 3, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, listen, he's calling for Elijah. And somebody ran, got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it up to him to drink, saying, wait, let's see if Elijah will come to take him down. Then Jesus gave a loud cry and died. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. When the centurion who stood facing him saw that this was the manner in which he died, he said, truly, this man was the Son of God. Also, there were women looking on from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Younger and Joses, and Salome. These women used to follow him and supported him when he was in Galilee. And there were many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem. The word of God for the people of God to remember.
Hallelujah.
Okay, and please bear with me while I adjust my computer setup. Sit down.
So, when you want to respond to Jean, just remember to unmute yourself.
Okay. So, first question, as promised, was about process. Listening to this being told, what was there anything that that struck you or sounded new or different? Yes, Sarah.
Well, I thought it was quite kind of interesting, and it was when you said the King of the Jews, and maybe your intonation, I'm not sure what, maybe things I've been hearing recently about this moment, but I had always focused on the word king, that it was a mockery. But this time I heard the word Jews, and it reminded me more of the political situation that this represented, or in which it came, that Rome was had been tormenting and torturing Jews, and that this was just the ultimate, it may be more of a racial thing, and maybe because of the environment we're in now about race and cultures, just made that stand out to me. So
Okay,
another meaning.
Yes, the political aspect of it definitely was there. The Romans didn't crucify just anybody. It was pretty much reserved for slaves, which actually was probably the highest proportion, and political threats, insurrectionists. Mm-hmm. There are people who would argue that word, I stuck with the NRSV saying the other two people being crucified were bandits. Some people would say insurrectionists. And getting to your point about political, yes, a king, this guy as king of the Jews, that's a problem for Rome because they're not recognizing any kings except the ones they appoint, like Herod, who was kind of sort of Jewish. but was a Roman appointee, which meant he could be unappointed if he wasn't doing what the Romans wanted. So that was the charge was a political insurrection thing for somebody else to be claiming to be king of the Jews. A similar line, it's like when the chief priests and scribes are mocking him. They use two terms. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel. So they're using two terms there. Messiah is a term that the Jews would understand. They'd been waiting for a Messiah. They had expectations of a Messiah, but also King of Israel. And frankly, I can't tell you why one time it's King of the Jews and the other time it's King of Israel. But that is a term that Romans would understand. That was a title that Jesus was being ascribed to him. So yeah, you're right. It was a political thing, and they were definitely keeping the Jews down. Okay. Yes, Carol.
Yes. Well, I thought when I knew you were doing Mark, I realized that would be a shorter, terser version than some of the other Gospels, because that's how Mark is. But the thing I noticed the most was then the proportion of what parts of the story got the most emphasis, because Mark was going to be short. So I just jotted down, why in the world did he name the children of the guy that carried the cross? What was the importance of that? I thought, where are all of Mark's immediates that he uses so much? Because this was moving too fast for me. When I read it in the Bible, I can slow down and think about it. And each minute, I thought, for the people there, must have felt like days because of all the things going on. And here we were rushing through it. And then I thought, when you got to the women, my gosh, they got so many words compared to the rest of the stuff. So it gave me a chance to think about it differently in terms of how Mark chose to write the story.
Okay, those are all really good points. Yeah, that bit about that detail about Rufus and Alexander, the people don't know, but they think, as you point out, why that tiny detail, that what was most likely is that Alexander and Rufus were perhaps known to Mark's original audience. So he'd want to connect it up that way. Of course, that's just a speculation, but I guess that's the best speculation they could come up with for what, as you have correctly pointed out, is a rather granular detail in a fairly terse writer. And I guess I had not noticed that there's no immediately in this. I've been preparing another Mark story, which starts with the word immediately. So I found that very useful. It's like, oh yeah, this is Mark's version. I start with the word immediately. And then there's another at once in there. But you're right, there isn't here, and he is slowing it down. The Gospel of Mark has sometimes been described as a passion narrative with a long introduction. So if the passion narrative was what Mark felt his major point was, maybe he did want to slow it down that way. I guess, yeah, more about Simon of Cyrene there is probably what's going on there is that he's a Jew in Jerusalem for the Passover. Cyrene is a city in North Africa in what's now Libya. And it's possible that Simon owned land in Jerusalem because it says he's coming in from the countryside, or that word might actually be translated as coming in from the fields. So yeah, like I said, the audience may have known Rufus and Alexander, and that was, kind of a connection with his audience. And as you may know, convicted criminals typically only carried the crossbar, not the whole cross, according to Roman custom. The the upright part would already be in place. And yeah, the implication is that Jesus was too weakened by the flogging to be able to carry it anymore. So, okay.
I hadn't ever heard the Elijah lines before. I've read this, it's not a spoiler, but somehow the Elijah lines just whooshed right over me.
Yeah, that actually was my biggest speed bump when I was looking at this story. Why are people talking about Elijah? So let me ask you, and anybody who wants to unmute quickly can answer this. Can anyone think of another place in the Gospels where Elijah shows up?
One of Transfiguration.
Transfiguration.
One of the three people for whom they're going to make a tent or a something. Yeah.
A booth. Yes. Yeah, that's a tricky word to translate. Yeah, somehow I suspect that if I were to take a poll and ask who are the two most important characters in the Old Testament, I think Moses's name would come up frequently. I'm not so sure Elijah would. You got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Solomon, Isaiah, all of these people who I think would be considered more prominent than Elijah. But and also when Mark tells that story of the Transfiguration, just a couple chapters before that, he even names Elijah first. Then there appeared to him Elijah with Moses. It's kind of like, oh yeah, Moses is along for the ride, who were talking with Jesus. And then when they come down from the mountain, they're talking about the coming of Elijah. So we can see that Elijah was pretty important during that time period. He was seen as someone who would punish the wicked and reward the righteous, at least in the Talmud. That's the way he's seen, and that is sometime after Jesus. I think a lot of people, I do want to do a deep dive here on Elijah, because that did explain certain things about Jesus's context for me. And I think a lot of people would know where in the Bible to look for stories about Moses. But does anybody know where would you find the stories about Elijah?
Kings?
Kings, yes. Towards the end of First Kings and the beginning of Second Kings. He's one of those prophets that doesn't have a book of his own prophecies in a collection, the way Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the writing prophets, as they're called. They're just scattered through First and Second Kings. He's just to get you oriented historically about Elijah, he's a prophet in the first half of the 9th century BCE in the northern kingdom of Israel. Just to put that in context, here is a really quick recap of Israelite history. You got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph gets the whole family down into Egypt. That doesn't turn out so well. Moses gets them out of Egypt, but Moses doesn't get them into the promised land. Joshua takes them into the promised land. They live in a very decentralized government for a while under the period of Judges. That's not working out so well. They want a king. They get Saul. Saul works out for a while, then he's not working out so well. Then they get David, King David, king par excellence, and things are great, or so it seems, and then his son Solomon, also very prosperous, but Solomon's son Rehoboam manages to tick off the northern tribes, and they break off and they form the northern kingdom of Israel, which incidentally is where Galilee is. And so that's where Elijah is a prophet, and the remaining part is called the southern kingdom of Judah, and that's where Jerusalem is. So when you're reading the Old Testament, you see Israel, Judah, and you kind of go, oh, whatever. Okay, northern kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom of Judah. Elijah is there. Maybe 150 years or so after Elijah, northern kingdom of Israel falls to the Assyrians, and then maybe 150 years after that, southern kingdom of Judah falls to the Babylonians, and that's what starts off the Babylonian captivity. So that's Israelite history. So that's where Elijah is the northern kingdom before the Assyrians take over. And let's see, do people want to unmute and recall what are some things Elijah does? What do we know about this guy?
Contest on Mount Carmel.
Yeah, the big showdown on Mount Carmel where he kills 450 prophets of Baal, calling on God to set fire to the sacrifice. That's not the only time Elijah calls down and sets things on fire. Any other greatest hits from Elijah?
Deals a lot with Jezebel.
Oh yes, he does not get along with Jezebel and her husband King Ahab. He flees from them. While he's fleeing, an angel comes to bring him food and water. So I think he must be pretty special. On that flight from them, he complains to God. He hides in a cleft of rock, and God passes by. There's kind of a suggestion that was exactly where Moses also, had contact with God. Yes. Okay. Anything else that comes to mind?
Is he with Jesus after the for the ascension, Elijah?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Is Elijah there with Jesus on the ascension, or is talked about that? Did he also ascend?
Yeah, it's the transfiguration,
right?
Where he shows up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And isn't he in the Seder? Isn't he the?
Yes. That's not biblical text, but that is a traditional part of the Seder is that you leave a chair for Elijah.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, yeah. That's so that is a way in which he is still honored.
And is he the one who sort of disappears rather than dies?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Chariot of fire.
I thought it was a flaming chariot.
Yeah, that's right. That is maybe the most important thing about him. Other things are, he does a bunch of miracles. Ravens bring him food during a drought. He multiplies, meal and oil of the widow. He revives her dead son. But the really big deal is that he didn't die specifically, but rather he was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. A chariot of fire with horses of fire come and separate him and his successor Elisha. So so anyway, there's kind of a legendary and folkloric tone to the stories about him. He's a healer, he's a miracle worker, he's a king breaker, he's a king maker. He sure is a zealous opponent of Baal. Let's see. And also, in terms of this folkloric tone, when he first appears in the narrative in 1 Kings, he appears without any genealogy, without any credentials. You know how a lot of times a biblical character is introduced with, X, son of Y, or with an extensive listing of ancestors. They don't do that for Elijah. And the assumption is that, the author figures, hey, the audience knows who he is. You don't need an introduction. So you could say Elijah is writ large in these stories. He's kind of like a solitary superhero, like the Lone Ranger, or I was trying to, I guess I'm not that familiar with the Avengers to make a more up-to-date connection, but the other thing is the Avengers are a group, and Elijah, he's only I am left. I mean, I think he may exaggerate to the extent to which he's on his own.
He's actually reminding me of Batman, because Batman is depressed and angry and glum and dark and only human, and yet he accomplishes heroic things. So Elijah is glum, y'all. Yeah.
He doesn't sound like he's fun to hang out with. Nothing. I reviewed all his stories. Nah, I don't think so. Carol, you seem to want to say something.
One quickie about the widow of Zarephath.
Mm-hmm.
I tie that to the story you just told, because did the King of the Jews, and here he was healing a foreigner.
Yes.
And his God was for all people, just like we know that Jesus is for all people. So
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah,
It's
another
Yeah.
It's almost like Ezekiel is the Jesus of the Old Testament.
Yeah, about that widow of Zarephath. That's, as you say, it's not in Israel. And when Elijah is fleeing from Ahab and Jezebel, on a couple of these times, he is provided for by God or by angels, and sometimes in rather unexpected ways. I mean, okay, I mentioned ravens bring him food during a drought, and he's near a wadi that has water and he can drink. It doesn't jump into our minds immediately, but actually ravens are unclean. They are an unkosher bird. That's a mighty odd source of food for God to be sending you food via a raven. And then the widow of Zarephath, you've probably heard in other contexts, widows were often really poor. And this one is, she's getting ready to die. She is getting ready for her and her son to starve to death. So it's kind of like, if God sent you out on some sort of mission to do something and said something like, okay, in front of the public library, there's a homeless guy who hangs out in like a bus shelter thing. Go to him, he'll take care of you. You might be thinking like, yeah, really? And yeah, being sent to this woman who's on the verge of starvation as yeah, she'll go to her, and that's where you'll stay. Again, kind of unexpected. Let's see. Okay, well, it was mentioned that he doesn't quite die. He's taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. This is a really important feature about him. Sometimes the word that's used for that is that he was translated, which really doesn't mean anything other than he didn't die, just he kind of went directly to heaven with God. Enoch in Genesis is someone else that happens to. And so the thought was that since he didn't die, he's kind of like available to return to earth and usher in the great and terrible day of the Lord, as the book of Malachi puts it. If he didn't really die, so much easier to come back. And now let's take, if you happen to have a Bible handy, you might, or I'll read the last few phrases of the book of Malachi. It's hard to find Malachi flipping through the Bible because it's very short, only 4 chapters. So the book of Malachi ends by saying that Elijah will come back on the day of the Lord. Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 through 6 say, and the I here is God speaking, "Lo, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of children to their parents, so that I will not come and strike the land with a curse." So Elijah is seen as an apocalyptic figure, and as ready to return as the messenger of the day of the Lord. And the book of Malachi is the last book of prophets in the Old Testament. And by that, I don't mean it was the last to be written. It was probably written in the middle of the 5th century BCE, which is like more or less 450 years before Christ. And it's not the last book in the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible arranges the books differently. There's the Torah, the five books of the Pentateuch, just like we have. Then there's the Nebi'im, the prophets, and so that's where Malachi is. And then they have a section called the writings. But Christian Bibles arrange the books of what we call the Old Testament differently than a Jewish Bible does, and we put Malachi as the last book in the Old Testament. And so those last 2 sentences that I just read about sending Elijah, you read that, you turn the page and there's Matthew giving you the genealogy of Jesus. And in a couple of chapters, you're talking about John the Baptist. And you may recall several instances in the Gospels where people are wondering, is Jesus Elijah, or is John the Baptizer Elijah? So you can see that there was this expectation that people were, paying attention, to Elijah. Is Elijah coming? That this meant something to them. The beginning of Mark, back in chapter 1, when we first meet John the Baptizer, the details in verse 6, talking about clothes made of camel's hair, leather belt around his waist, 8 locusts and honey. All of that connects John with the way Elijah is depicted in the Hebrew Bible. So you can understand why people would be thinking that that might be Elijah. And people believed that Elijah would return at the beginning of the end time. Now I've been kind of tossing out words like apocalyptic, day of the Lord, coming of the end times. And it's kind of hard for me to put my finger on exactly what was meant by that. Different people and in different time periods would have different ideas about what would be happening. But the bottom line for all of these is that there's going to be a new age. Things are going to be different. So bottom line, how does all this stuff about Elijah connect with Mark's story of the crucifixion? Basically, the bystanders are wondering if Jesus is calling for the new age to come in. They're wondering, hoping even, is Jesus saying, "Save me now, Elijah, let's start the new age." Because, and actually then when someone runs to get the wine, it's to revive him, to give Elijah a little more time to show up and do this. Because, if Elijah shows up, that's huge. This is a big deal. And the people are hoping for a new age. They're occupied by the Romans. Their political and religious leadership are either appointed by Rome or are in cahoots with Rome, or find it useful to play nice with the Romans. Their economy is in shambles. The bottom line, things are not the way they're supposed to be. And they would really like Elijah to show up. They would really like a Messiah to get them out from under Roman domination. So I have told you a whole lot now about Elijah. Any questions, comments further on that?
Jean, that is so helpful. I have always just assumed with the detail about, listen, he's calling for Elijah, that they just kind of misunderstood him when he said Eloi, Eloi. And that makes huge sense, that they wondered if he was calling for the new age, which in a way he is. And then with the ripping of the temple, I think one of the things that you're telling made so clear was the cry of abandonment, the death, and then the tearing of the temple. Those all three felt to me like they were a single kind of event that was happening there, all of which is also, I think, an indication of the new age that is ripping into reality there. Just huge. So this is great.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad that came across, because that's what I wanted to be doing. And even the fact that darkness comes over the land, that's kind of an apocalyptic thing too. That's why that detail is in there. I will tell you, as I was researching for this, some interpreter thought that they're saying that about Elijah and getting the sour wine, that was additional taunting of Jesus. Obviously, I didn't choose to go that way. As you may have noticed, just speaking the words and choosing a tone of voice is an interpretation. But so I considered that. I thought, like, well, everybody else there is taunting him. But obviously, I decided to play it straight and assume that they were, in fact, hoping Elijah would come. It also seemed to me, this is happening outside the city wall, for somebody to bother to go get sponge, wine, stick, do all those things. If you were just, a bystander making fun and shooting your mouth off, maybe you wouldn't bother to do all that. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out as a possible alternate understanding of what they were doing with that. But even still, underlining that shows the belief that that is the sort of thing Elijah would do.
Jean, one of the things I really appreciated when you mentioned the LOI, Sabbatana, you almost like you were kind of pausing, you're gasping for breath. And I think we talked about crucifixion largely was asphyxiation is how you die.
Yes.
And I never heard that done that way before, and I really appreciated that. If that's the way, that's what you meant by doing it that way.
Yes, it was. So thank you for that. I guess in researching a little bit more about crucifixion, you're completely correct that asphyxiation was the major proximate cause of death. Dehydration was also a real possibility. That you'd be thirsty, and so some would say that's why he was being offered the wine. And it also stands to reason if they flogged people before, you bleed a lot, and that would also add to your dehydration. But yes, I was, trying to think about physical aspects of crucifixion for that.
That was something I noticed when you were telling. You asked what the telling made different. You'd done the very physical. The first time he's offered something. I think that's so much to drink, but is it myrrh? I can't remember.
Wine mixed with myrrh.
Yeah. And so you've done a very physical sort of turning away thing, and then it just says they crucified him, and it goes on, and it's sort of like getting somebody on the cross has to be a sort of big physical, complicated endeavor, and yet it just goes. So I noticed that from the telling.
Yeah, the wine mixed with myrrh, people think, and of course, different interpreters might have different ideas, that was basically a pain reliever thing. And he doesn't take it. And if you recall back to during the Last Supper, he says something about he will not drink wine again until he drinks, or the fruit of the vine until he drinks it in the kingdom of heaven. So, that I think is meant to be showing that he keeps that vow. With the sour wine on a sponge, I actually did consider again turning my head away. But the thing is, the next line is the thing about Elijah, and I just felt like, well, I can only do so many things at once without making it look, confusing. So. Yeah, there's that. And also, and you say the physical act of crucifixion that, Mark does not spend a lot of time on that. And if you look at the text as a whole, first of all, Mark's audience would have been pretty familiar with the physical pain and agony and mechanics, shall we say, of crucifixion. And the story does not spend much time on that. The story really focuses on the humiliation aspects. We run through 3 different groups of people who are mocking him. The passersby, the chief priests and scribes. And this is something that kind of came out for me while I was studying this story, was the other 2 were being crucified. It's like, my goodness, they are in that same horrible physical agony And yet somehow they've got the energy and wherewithal to go, oh, Jesus, you know, really? I mean, just that level that even people who are just like at the lowest point that one could be at still are mocking him.
Jean, I was going to ask about that. I was curious. I thought some of the other Gospels, you know, said that at least one of the bandits stood up for Jesus, you know, and said he was innocent and he's being crucified, you know, unjustly. But yet here, both of them, it indicates that both of them taunted him. So I don't know if there's any significance there. Or...
Well, you are absolutely right. Another gospel, I'm guessing it's Luke, because it sounds like the sort of thing Luke would say. You know, has the good one and the bad one, and they're having a little conversation up there. So really, all I can say is, you know, what I said is the way Mark tells the story. Other gospels tell the story differently. That's just the, you know, the texts that we have.
Right.
So yeah, that is a correct recollection, and but that's not what happens the way Mark tells the story.
You know, looking at this passage here, when you're all talking about Elijah, and it's all interpreted from the Jewish point of view that a new age was going to come, and they go through all that leads up to Jesus dies, and then right smack in the middle of that, the centurion says, "Truly, this man is the Son of God." That kind of stuck out as sort of like, well, where did that realization come from?
Okay, that is a very good point. That does just, you know, it's kind of come out of nowhere. So let's talk about the centurion. Okay, obviously he's a Roman soldier, he's a Gentile, and he is the first human in the gospel to call Jesus God's son. Well, actually, backing up a little, a centurion is the officer in charge of 100 men. That's where the cent in centurion comes from. So he would have been the one in charge of the group that was carrying out Pilate's orders for the crucifixion. It's likely he was getting those orders directly from Pilate, because if you read later into the story, Pilate summons him to ask, "Oh, is Jesus dead already?" So, you know, he's not just any random Roman soldier. You earned that position of being centurion by valor in battle. So this is going to be a tough warrior type. And when he sees how he dies, it's not just when the centurion saw that he was dead, or then the centurion said, it's when the centurion who stood facing him, because, you know, he would have been there to make sure everything went the way it was supposed to, according to Pilate's orders, he's the one in charge, stood facing him, saw that this was the manner in which he died. So it was something about the way in which he died that has this huge effect on him. And that title, Son of God, is probably like the greatest title of respect that Roman soldier could think of to use, because Roman emperors were named Son of God, like, you know, Augustus and Caesar were, I guess, given that accolade by the Senate. And so something about the character of Jesus' death has the power to change the mind of this tough guy who is in fact the executioner. So I think Mark is trying to get that point across, that this was something really special. And the line that he says, this was God's son, like I said, he's the first human to call Jesus God's son. Mark starts off in chapter 1, verse 1, actually, even by telling the audience that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. So it's like, we're in on the secret. We're told that from the beginning. As we move through the gospel, people are figuring that out bit by bit. Let's see. So during Jesus's baptism, for example, there's a voice from heaven, "You are my son." So God says it. Jesus casts out demons who know who he is. And sometimes Jesus tells them not to speak because they recognized him. There's one in chapter 3 that says, whenever the evil spirits saw him, they fell down at his feet and shouted, "You are God's son." But Jesus strictly ordered them not to reveal who he was. And later on in chapter 5, the demon that's possessing the man that we refer to as the Gerasene demoniac, he says, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" So we've got a number of non-human entities who know that Jesus is God's son. And during the transfiguration, God says, "This is my son whom I dearly love. Listen to him." So you've got God and demons, saying this, but the first human who says this, that Jesus is the Son of God, is this Roman centurion who, and this is sort of an irony. It's also maybe sort of an outreach beyond the Jewish people because he's Gentile, but the centurion declares something that the followers of Jesus have not. And so that line from the centurion is really pretty significant.
I like that it's a gap, that it's a mystery. We don't know what he saw that made him think that. Just like the actual crucifixion, we just go and then they crucify Jesus. There's a gap of horror or shock or anguish or whatever, that just tying this back to last week, I guess, the gaps and the shock and the trauma of things.
Okay, there's some more comments, and I can't see everybody. I've got 25 people on my screen.
Yeah, so trying to move around.
Okay, and is there anything in the chat that should be attended to?
No, there isn't.
Okay, well, another topic that I kind of wondered about when I was learning this story is about the temple curtain. Because this event is, it's kind of ambiguous, and it may just be symbolic to say and the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And the temple curtain, it marked the space that was reserved for God's presence. Only the high priest could go in there, and that's only one day of the year, Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. And so beyond the curtain is the Holy of Holies, where God was believed to be enthroned. Back in Solomon's temple, that's where the Ark of the Covenant had been. Solomon's temple is also called the First Temple, which was destroyed by the Babylonians in like 586 BCE. And as we all know from watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones finds it, and it is now in a basement somewhere in Washington, D.C. But they never found that. When they came back from the Babylonian Empire and Babylonian exile, the Jewish people rebuilt the temple. That one's called the Second Temple. And it wound up being destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. So it was still standing at the time of Jesus. When Jesus goes to the temple, that's the Second Temple. The Second Temple probably had already been destroyed by the time the Gospels were written, and sometimes you can see hints of that, scholars looking at the Gospels. So that's what that curtain represents. So even though they didn't have the Ark of the Covenant in there, that was the space where God was. And there's a lot of understandings of what's going on there. One traditional understanding of this verse is that Jesus is removing the separation between heaven and earth, and thus he's like the pioneer of a new relationship. So again, we had talked about the notion of bringing in a new age, and in a way that was happening. Another way to think of it is that, that curtain is torn and God is on the loose in the world. You can also draw a parallel to the Mark's account of the baptism of Jesus, because it says that Jesus saw heaven splitting open. And that is supposed to be, kind of like bookends with, that happens with the baptism, and the temple curtain is torn open at the crucifixion. So other people have considered that it foreshadows the destruction of the temple that happens in 70. That the death of Jesus is making access to God possible for all humanity, because that separation is no longer there. And thus that God is revealing God's self, which is called a theophany, that God is revealed in the death of Jesus. That's another way to think about it. And another one that I came upon while reading up for this is, you may well know that tearing of one's clothes is a traditional symbol of grief. You see people doing that, in the Bible all the time. That the tearing of the temple curtain could be seen as a sign of God's grief at the moment of Jesus's death. That I kind of like that idea, and that also would imply that God had not abandoned him, that God was grieving and was aware and was thinking about this when that happened. So those are some alternate ways of understanding that detail about the tearing of the temple curtain. I remember a lot of things from my seminary education, but maybe the one that sticks most prominent in my mind is my New Testament professor, while talking about different interpretations of one thing or another, pointing out, scholars get paid to disagree with each other. So, the fact that we have a plurality of ways to understand this should not surprise us. And of course, they aren't mutually exclusive. And I'll mention that, from the storytelling point of view, I did kind of have to, think hard about how to do that one line, because it feels like a very abrupt interruption of the narrative. The verses before it and the verses after it are all reporting what's happening at Golgotha, which would have been outside the city wall of Jerusalem. And that's not near the temple. If you were at the temple, you wouldn't be seeing the crucifixion. If you were watching the crucifixion, you wouldn't know what was going on in the temple. So, just like, this one line, but there it is. And it's right there in the story. And Reverend Scott, I guess, had mentioned that about, kind of seeing, kind of feeling like all these things happen at once. So just dealing with that interruption, I think Mark is trying to say that it's not just about this man dying right here, right now, but that it has heavenly symbolism, and the normal order of things is shattered, everything's turned upside down. So anyway, so those are some thoughts about the tearing of the curtain. Yeah, Carol?
Oh, just one more far-flung thing. Okay, so throughout the Bible, things in the world react, like the mountains sing, and there's all sorts of natural things doing human-like things. So I'm wondering if the temple and the temple curtain represents the ultimate of a human creation related to God. And it seems to me it's like the most dramatic way you could show that this is the moment. This is the moment that everything changes. God's world changes, the human world changes. It's just a moment of maximum reaction of the world to the momentous event.
Well, I like that. Yeah. I think that is, part of what Mark is trying to do, and that, even this tough guy. I mean, this centurion. I mean, he's the epitome, really, of the enemies of Israel. He's, the tough guy officer of the occupying Roman army. And he is being, changed in his heart in this way, to say this in a way that his disciples, and in Mark, the disciples are like kind of dumb, they're just kind of keep on not getting it. That's kind of the point of what Mark is telling, and so here's, the centurion, who is the first human to say it out loud. So yeah, Carol, I like that this is just like yet another symbol that, things are different now.
Earlier in Mark, they talk about when Jesus was brought before Caiaphas, and chief priest asks him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus goes, "I am the Son of Man," and that passage about sitting at the right hand of power. Then the high priest tore his clothes, and so that was an immediate reaction to that. Then you go to Jesus dies on the cross and the curtain is torn. So it's sort of like a bookend.
There's parallels there definitely going on. Another parallel with the tearing of the curtain and the tearing open of the heavens during the baptism is just before the Last Supper, the unnamed woman who anoints him with, or that she breaks open, the alabaster jar to anoint him. So that, again, that breaking open of something to anoint him for his death. Because that's the thing, is she gets it. And the rest of the disciples don't, and they're complaining about money. And actually that scene also has a parallel in that, women anointing Jesus's body kind of bookend the physical horror of the crucifixion. Because she anoints him, and then the women, well, actually they don't get to do it because there's no body there, but they are going, so you have these two scenes of care and tenderness bookending the horror of the crucifixion. So yeah, these Gospels, they're it's very rare for somebody to sit down and read one straight through, but we usually just tend to take the little snippets as they're given to us in the lectionary. These Gospels are they're constructed. And they're not just beads on a string. One thing happens, then another thing happens, then another things, but things are referring back to each other. Okay, we have some time left. There was another thing. I'm sure lots of people can get started on this topic. Was there any line from this story that made anyone think of any of the Psalms?
Well, other than Jesus quoting the Psalm.
Right. Yeah. My God, why have you forsaken me? Most people are aware that comes from Psalm 22, and I know I at least was told, and the way you can remember this is that Psalm 22 is the one before Psalm 23, which I guess kind of shows what a grip Psalm 23 has on our culture, that, you only know one, 23. Okay, but there's actually quite a lot of details from Psalm 22 that show up in the crucifixion story. Let's see. What shall I say? When they divide the clothes among them, casting lots. There's quite a bit there on shaking heads, mocking, make mouths at me, scorning, despising. And even that line about save yourself. Of course, you remember the Psalms are written in Hebrew. The New Testament's written in Greek. They both get translated into English, which is a very wordy language with lots of synonyms. So it's not that the same word always shows up there. But even that bit about save yourself, there's a thing about, let the Lord deliver, let the Lord rescue.
Yeah.
So I am thinking that, well, first of all, I am noticing that Judith Herseth has raised her hand. So maybe I should pause for a moment and let her speak. Judith, if you want to unmute yourself. Yes? No?
Judy, can you unmute yourself?
I can unmute, but my hand got raised by accident.
Okay. All
Sorry.
Right. Okay. Well, just so you can listen to a voice other than mine here, how about we take a look at Psalm 22, and in the first several verses, listen for some of the phrases that you heard in the Mark crucifixion story. And I'm going to ask Rachel to read that. If you have a Bible handy, Psalm 22, it's the one before Psalm 23. You can read along, or you can just listen to Rachel. I'll tell you, Psalm 22, it's a classic psalm lament of a righteous sufferer. And it moves from anguish, and that's where you'll find all the references, to deliverance. There's a quick sentence in there where it turns to deliverance, and then the end of it is praise. So the ending of this psalm is actually very positive. And this has led some interpreters to think that Jesus is recalling the entire psalm when he quotes that first line. So that's kind of a positive spin to put on it. I guess I can't really say that I know what Jesus was thinking if this did, call up the entirety of it. But okay, Rachel, do you have your text ready?
I do.
Let's
and I'll note the time that we're getting close to when we need to wrap up. But I do think that wrapping up with the psalm, it is a powerful thing. And so Psalm 22, plea for deliverance from suffering and hostility. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me, from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our ancestors trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not human, scorned by others and despised by the people. All who see me mock at me. They make mouths at me. They shake their heads. Commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights. Yet it was you who took me from the womb. You kept me safe on my mother's breast. On you I was cast from my birth. And since my mother bore me, you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. Many bulls encircle me, strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me like a ravening and roaring lion. I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. For dogs are all around me. A company of evildoers encircles me. My hands and feet have shriveled. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among themselves. For my clothing, they cast lots. But you, O Lord, do not be far away. O my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. From the horns of the wild oxen, you have rescued me. I will tell of your name to my brothers and sisters. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify him. Stand in awe of him, all you offspring of Israel. For he did not despise or abhor the affliction of the afflicted. He did not hide his face from me, but heard when I cried to him. From you comes my praise in the great congregation. My vows I will pay before those who fear him. The poor shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek him shall praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. To him indeed shall all who sleep in the earth now bow down. Before him who bow, all who go down to the dust, and I shall live for him. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord and proclaim his deliverance to a people yet unborn, saying that he has done it. The word of the Lord.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for reading that so nicely. Some of you may recall other crucifixion stories have Jesus at the end saying, "It is finished." The last line, the end of the last verse of what Rachel just read, saying that he has done it. I just can't help but wonder if he has done it and it is finished. If there isn't some similarity, if there is maybe an alternate wording, if maybe Jesus did in fact get to the end
of the
Psalm 22. So, okay, I see it is 10:53. Do you usually stop now? Do you usually go all the way to 11? Okay.
No, we usually stop now to give people time to set up things. Do you want me to pray people out? Do you all want a final prayer?
Yes. Yes, that would be nice.
This is from Sarah Bessie, one of my go-tos. God of donkeys and palm branches, of people who betray and people who hold fast, of holy weeks that bring us to the depths of suffering and the heights of resurrection, draw near to us. Disrupt us, God. Disrupt all the ways we've adapted and adapt it to the world's priorities, powers, and principles. As the light disrupts the dark, disrupt us. We can hear your new world breathing about to be born, and we claim our spot in your kingdom, God, right with the liars and the thieves, the betrayers and the silent ones, the faithful and the stalwart. May the rocks never have to cry out on our watch. May our mouths be filled with our joy and truth. We want to be a people who can hold space for both our hope and our grief, our disappointment, and your disruptions. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God and Mother of us all. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. This has been a very fine time. I am so glad that you were receptive and engaged, and that we had a good conversation here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good church.
Yeah.
See you in
Happy Palm
church.
Sunday, everybody.
Happy Sunday.
Thank you.
Yes, I hope we'll cross paths again, Sarah, if you get involved in the network of biblical
Yeah.
storytellers.